Hi and welcome back to the Roaring Twenties Podcast with me, Isabella Sheekey.
And me, Sam Pennifold.
Today we're starting the first of the US election podcast series. On the day of filming there's 58 days until the US election. Hopefully we'll get a few guests on to discuss what's going on over on the other side of the Atlantic. Hopefully some representatives from the Canadian and American society.
Great. So, firstly, we're just going to look at how the US election works. The US election is a complicated and scaled up version of the British electoral system, i.e., your vote is somewhat representative, but not necessarily, and each state has a system where they assign a certain number of electoral college voters who are then assigned based on popular votes within the state, and it is all or nothing in most of the states, other than two states which do it proportionally. And the magic number you have to get to is 270, which can lead to some interesting scenarios.
You often hear people talking about swing states. That's because these states are very important for either the Republicans or the Democrats to win, especially looking at the 2016 US election.
Yeah, so last year, last election, one of the most crucial states was Pennsylvania, which this time is Joe Biden's home state, and whilst a senator, he was referred to as the third senator of Pennsylvania. So what he needs to do is win back this state off Donald Trump, which was in the polls favouring Hillary Clinton right up until the election. And the thing about swing states are that essentially they're a state where you don't know whether or not they're going to vote for Democrat or Republican on any given year. And these are the states that then also called battleground states, where there's the most money spent by campaigns. So there are huge, TV ads, radio ads, there'll be multiple state visits by the candidates, their families, their representatives. And these are the states that, where the election is won or lost, as opposed to states where, traditionally will vote Democrat no matter who they put forward as their representative, or who will traditionally vote Republican no matter who they put forward.
Looking at what's been happening in the past few weeks, the most important events that have been taking place are the DNC and the RNC. A lot of significant things have been said during this past few weeks, most importantly what's really taking place with the Postal Service and the debate around that, especially when it comes to terms with what Trump has been saying. Because he's the incumbent candidate, his words actually have a lot more influence than, say, Biden's. So what he's been saying about the Postal Service is a lot of fraud can take place around this. He's saying that you shouldn't trust it, and if the vote is swung by the mail-in ballots, then it doesn't really count, and you should be questioning the democracy that's taking place around that. But obviously, we're in a pandemic, people don't really want to be travelling to the polls, so they're counting on having a lot more mail-in ballots in this US election than they have been previously. What the conversation around this is doing to this election is questioning whether the outcome will be honest, democratic, truthful. And I think it's going to cause a big issue if Biden wins and it's not an outright majority from people turning up on poll day.
Well, yeah, so the New York Times recently released an article that was the doomsday scenario. And the doomsday scenario is that Donald Trump wins on the night because his voters in polling favour voting in person, and their votes are counted on the day per election law. But mail-in votes or absentee ballots do not have to be counted on the same day as the election. So the official result might not be announced, till 3, 4, 5 days after the election, in which case Trump might have already declared a victory, and then might have to actually say that he's lost, which to many of his voters is feared that will look like the election's been stolen. And then you'll have the issues that happened last time when Donald Trump was won and there was large protests across the country. The issue is the fear is that happens again this year, just in the reverse. And it will be an election for the ages to see the election coverage on the night and how it will play out over the next weeks, on the likes of CNN and Fox, how they react. If they declare Donald Trump as, the winner, or do they say, Donald Trump is winning, or how they go play it? Because the media in America has such a sway especially Fox News, on Donald Trump's base that is uncomparable to the same way it has an impact on British politics currently, at the moment anyway. And I think that could be one of the most interesting things about this election.
Well, I've seen on Twitter a lot of US journalists have been saying that their newsrooms are preparing for a situation like that. And it's quite... I mean, how often will that happen in our lifetimes where they're actually having to prepare for a president not accepting the election results? It's quite scary to think.
Yeah, it's one of those... It's kind of a... You wouldn't have thought 10 years ago that you would even be thinking about, what do you do if the president doesn't accept the election of the result?
Yeah.
You're not really thinking... You could argue that America, in its history of, intervention around the world, if this was to be happening in a small South American country, America's military might would be, expressed forcefully, and they would choose their own leader to rule this country. And now they're having this kind of the same kind of issues that they've, used to justify their actions around the world. It's
well, I think irony. The only way for Biden to win and not be questioned is to have a majority on election day. Otherwise, it is going to be a lot of arguing, a lot of Trump on Twitter having his rants, his usual rants.
There's very little basis to argue that voting fraud itself in America, according to a 2017 study from the Brandon Center for Justice, is between 0.0004 and 0.0009%. So alone, has almost zero impact. It marginally, by about 0.1, it can increase across mail-in voting or absentee voting. But still, the Washington Post in 2016 found there was one proven case of postal voting fraud. And the issue is that most of the so-called frauds that does ever happen for postal votes are accidental cases of people voting twice without really realising that they voted twice, which is not the entire country of America isn't going to accidentally vote twice for Joe Biden. Donald Trump might be.
Trump's already calling for people to vote twice just to check that it is working.
Yeah, just to check that it is.
It doesn't seem it's the best way to
There's a certain irony in this that watching The West Wing in the re-election of President Josiah Bartlet, where one of his senior councillors goes to the polls to obviously vote for him on the day. And they do a whole skit around all these people come up to him being so, how do I vote for him? Do I vote for him in every column? And it's just kind of it's just amusing the way that it's now coming true that these what was once considered political jokes is now serious food for thought on the politics.
You see quite a lot of that, don't you? Often satire actually becomes reality.
Unfortunately, it's most of American politics is now quickly turning into satire.
I don't think Britain's too far behind
We
either.
realise that, yeah. We're not speaking from a position of strength, though, are we? Also, I'm going to look at polls. So, American polls are one of the biggest parts of how American election works. And, it heavily favours Joe Biden. So, according to the Financial Times, you take an average across various respective polls. Joe Biden is on 269 points or percentage. So, he is looking at winning the election. He is one seat off an outright win. But at the moment, it's still too early to call because so is Hillary Clinton. So
yeah, I think a lot of people, when you talk about polls now, will call back to the 2016 US election and say, well, Hillary Clinton was ahead prior to the election and Donald Trump still won. However, a lot of people discussed with those polls in 2016 the idea that on the lead up to the election day, there was a lot of switching, a lot of fall and gain within the polls itself, especially when it was Donald Trump's comments about how he treated women in Hollywood. Also, the email scandal with Hillary Clinton. However, Biden has been consistently 8-9 points ahead in these polls. There's been little gain, little loss. Especially people were expecting a gain and loss after the RNC and the DNCs, but that didn't happen. So the consistency for Biden supporters is quite encouraging, I think.
Yeah, but the issue is, again, a lot of people talk about the kind of the shy Trump voted, a person who doesn't want to
Yeah.
admit and doesn't want anyone to know that they voted Donald Trump.
They didn't want to tell people that they were voting for Trump.
Once you pull across that curtain and you go in the voting box, it's just you and the piece of paper. No one never knows what you're going to vote for.
Yeah,
so.
I think it's interesting that kind of plays into how the Democrats are running this election campaign as well, in the idea that it's anti-Trump, not anti-Republican. So they're saying the Trump presidency is bad and you shouldn't vote for him, in hopes that those Republican voters will forget their tribal instincts with being with the Republican Party and switch over to the Democrats.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things. I think, well, under the Obama era, administration, he managed to work relatively effectively in comparison to most presidents with the Republican Party. He worked quite well with John McCain, even though they were, at one point rivals for the presidency. They had their mutual respect. I think any mutual respect for most of the Democrats and the Republicans has vastly been washed away during the Trump presidency so far. I think you see that with some of the kind of the quotes and the reactions that Nancy Pelosi comes out to like all the troops of senators and congressmen from the Republican Party who just go, "Oh, I didn't know Trump said that," and they never outright criticize. I think Mitt Romney is one of the few that ever actually says, he's wrong. What he's saying is ridiculous, and he's one of the only few. But then I also think Mitt Romney's going to try and run for presidency next time it runs.
Yeah, Trump is one of those things where he's said so much that any other president, if they'd have said even one thing, they'd have been called out for it and been a bit more scorned for what they said. Yeah. But Trump has just said so much that whatever he said, it just kind of drifts into the background. His Twitter is absolutely ridiculous.
Well, he set this precedent of he says outrageous things, and no one was ever expecting him to not say outrageous things. So everyone's just kind of, oh, he said something ridiculous
that, and
again.
it's almost funny when it
you
shouldn't
almost
be
laugh.
funny.
But if that was, if Joe Biden was ever to go on a ridiculous Twitter rant about something, it'd be a news cycle for weeks on end.
It'd almost like, he's going insane.
But your Trump is just like, oh, it's Trump, it's what you're expecting. I think that's going to be an interesting phenomenon going into the three nationalised debates between them. I think for Trump, it's going to be impossible to underperform because there are zero expectations on him. No matter what he says...
There's a lot of pressure on Biden.
Biden, on the other hand, if he doesn't perform well, then it looks like Trump's won.
I think the debate is on the 28th of September.
I think that's the first one.
I think Trump is expected to do quite well because he's actually quite good at debates. Yeah. He performed quite well in the Hillary Clinton debate in 2016.
So he's a good debater.
He's good at rallying up his
sense.
opponent.
He can annoy an opponent with the little Marco comments and Sleepy Joe. He's not maybe the most nuanced debater in the world. He's just great at producing one-line quotes that just make you say
sound bites.
Yeah, he's a good soundbite producer.
Something that will play into this election is identity politics as well. Something that's dominated the conversation for the past 5 years. Especially in the fact that Trump wants to come across as a law and order president. He wants to say that the Democrats aren't fit to handle and keep America safe, and you need to vote for Republicans if you want law and order under Trump.
Yeah.
However, the Democrats are trying to say that, especially in a speech that Biden just did, where he constantly referred to the word safe. Yeah. He kept saying that America's safe. You will be safe if you vote for Democrats. Mm-hmm. It's because that Trump is playing the law and order card, and the fact that the Democrats and the economy will not be safe under so-called radical socialism under Biden.
Joe Biden's maybe the furthest thing from a radical socialist you could possibly imagine. He's hardly done that much ever. He's the same person who would refute. He didn't support bus boycotting. He's hardly the most radical thinker in the world. He's just a safe, kind of steady pair of hands who can... Well, he's just the antithesis of Donald Trump, and he's the exact opposite, and it's just going to be a boring... he's almost saying, I will be a boring 4 years. You do not need to worry about, your jobs, you don't need to worry about these things. For 4 years, you can just not care about politics under me.
Well, I think young people and people on the far left in America of the spectrum, they're not satisfied with Biden's politics. However, they realise that Biden is a necessity to get the Democrats back in and Trump out again.
I think a lot of people kind of, I've even seen like ads where it's done, Joe Biden is maybe he could be a bit more progressive, maybe he could be a little bit more this, a little bit more that, but he's not Donald Trump. And his key campaign promise is, I am not Donald Trump. My best thing I can offer is I'm somewhat close to a normal human being.
Yeah.
So, identity politics I think is going to be one of the key factors, and I think there are a lot of Republicans who would be a little bit embarrassed to say, I am a Republican at the moment, but how can you leave your tribe to say, no, I'm now going to vote Democrat? I think there's probably more people that will just not vote at all than vote for the Democratic Party, which doesn't help anyone really if you just don't vote at all.
Biden almost seems like a treadmill to Kamala Harris's campaign in 2024. Yeah. It's almost as if, okay, get Biden in, and then Kamala Harris is the one that we want.
Yeah. I think Joe Biden's a perfectly acceptable politician. He has his flaws, and he's perfectly entitled to his opinions on whatever he wants. I just think the Democratic trend at the moment, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is towards the kind of further left. Not like.
Well, they're the most outspoken in the party.
But so I think the trend is that way. I think Kamala Harris. Well, I think at this point there are poli-sci majors across America who are thinking, I want to see if I can find a way to volunteer for her campaign. In office
100%.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
There are people around backing Kamala to be their next horse to try and take them to a job in the White House, but I wouldn't be so sure that she does win. I think Pete Buttigieg will go back.
Oh yeah.
I think, and to be honest, I'm not really sure if Joe Biden will want to be a one-term president. I think a large part of him
he might be a one-term president. How old is he now? 78.
When he gets elected, he'll be the oldest president in his first term.
There is a point when you get to such an age, you've got to question: are they still mentally?
It's a thing because in America there's such a big thing about when presidential candidates, they have health and fitness tests and they have tests on their cognitive ability. You're not worrying about that when you're 40 or 50.
Exactly, yeah.
When you start to worry about these things and say, look, I'm so proud I passed my cognitive test. It's a bit like, it's not, you don't need to.
You shouldn't even need it in the first place.
The fact that you having to have one is the questioning thing.
Trump is 72?
Yeah, he's 2 years between them. Yeah. It's hardly
what's quite funny is when they're having arguments about you're older than me. It's like you're both quite old.
Yeah, there's a lot of young progressive people coming through, and you're trying to scrabble that you're still youthful.
But I've seen a lot of articles and journalists saying that Biden is possibly just a one-term president.
I think I can certainly see him being one. I just don't think he
personally might not want to be.
I think he will be thinking, well, I'll always be Obama's number 2 if I'm only a one-term president.
Also,
I'll always only be his VP and I'll be a one-term president.
It depends on how much he gets done in that 4 years. Like, will he be satisfied with what he's done in that time period? And really, at the end of 4 years, you're probably only just staking your claim, aren't you? It's only just making your mark.
As soon as the general election happens, you're essentially straight preparing for the midterms. And as soon as the midterms happen, you're running for re-election.
Yeah.
And then you've got midterms again because you don't want to lose the House before you leave the presidency. And then that's it for politics. You're gone.
Yeah.
The maximum life once you're a president, you've got 8 years. Maybe only 4, and so I think that he'll want all 8 to be able to. But will the Democratic Party want him to have?
They
all
might
8
be
years?
kicking him out at the end of
getting
someone new.
Well, this year the Republicans, they haven't challenged Trump. I think that Biden, if he was to get elected, he'll face challenges, and there'll be a proper primary. Well, I think that's the thing about American politics is this election only means it's 4 years until the next election in American politics. There'll be people who are already trying to position themselves around the country.
There's something so interesting about US politics as well. As someone that obviously is from Britain, from England, it just seems so extravagant and so big. And then when they get elected the president, it's like a celebrity. Like you never saw David Cameron when he got re-elected, or Boris Johnson. It wasn't the same
It's like this sort of fanfare.
It's like you've almost elected a royal family member. Like you're the new member of the royal family.
Yeah.
It's massive.
American politics is a made-for-TV, made-for-drama event. It's it's not a boring thing. A British general election is it's over within a month. Designed to be quick, speedy. Everyone moves on, stiff off a lip about it. We then don't talk about it for 4 more years.
And then it's back again.
And then we're back again for another month.
And you almost saw that in the RNC and the DNCs as well. Everything. It was so cringy, and you're like, oh, what is this? But I think it's because when we're not Americans, we're not surrounded by that. We will never fully get it.
I think American politics is only truly understood by Americans. There's a cultural aspect to American politics which just isn't the same. British politics, if you're interested in politics, you'll follow British politics. If you're not, you'll occasionally look at a few tweets. Yeah. If it's on the front page of the BBC or the Times or whatever you read, then you'll look at it. Otherwise, it's just like whenever it happens, it happens. Who really cares that much?
Yeah, it's almost as a president, you're like a celebrity.
Yeah, you're essentially American king or queen for 4 years. You're not. The president has more power than the prime minister does in this country by infinite amount. So
yeah, that's what makes it so different as well.
I think also the roles of Fox News and CNN. The way the news media works in the US was also so much different here. And I think it riles up the base and it riles up people and everyone gets opinionated and they have, news shows that are really just, a thin veil of news over opinion.
I think it's quite scary looking at the American way of presenting news and the idea that, you watch Fox News if you're right wing, and it's scary to look at that and think, oh, we might become that because it's not a healthy way of receiving your news. How can you be impartial if only left-wing people watch this and right-wing people watch that? Because the networks will be tailoring what they produce to their audience, obviously. So it's just going to get more radical as it goes along.
Fox News, I think, it's always meant to have been an opinion show, but they've just always no one's ever really said, oh wait, no, this is actually an opinion show. It's not a news show. These are just right-wing talking heads who are discussing the news.
And it's entertainment as well, isn't it?
It's just entertainment. It's drama. I watch Fox News just because it's amusing. You listen to these opinions they come out with, and they're just like screaming and shouting about migrant caravans who are going to invade the US.
They're saying it to be provocative.
Yeah, they're being provocative.
Get views
they
and
want
rile
ratings.
People up.
They want people to watch, and they want
they
want people
discuss
angry.
it on Twitter and
in the same way that CNN's hardly CNN drives panic. It drives left wing kind of. Oh, you have to hate the right. The right's horrible. Everyone that's a right wing politician.
But obviously because they're tailoring what they're producing to a left wing audience, because they can't be questioning. Yeah,
you can't question the wisdom of the left to the left.
Because no one will have time for it. They'll just switch off and be like, "What is this?"
You can't. There's personality cults everywhere in the American
And I think
politics.
you see that almost coming over to Britain as well, in the idea that BBC is being questioned, and that's almost scary in a way, because you think, well, I don't want our news to go the same way that American news has gone. Because I think the BBC is so important to how British people receive their news.
I think it's a British culture, a bit British politics. I think the BBC is, it's impartial. The whole point of the BBC is that it's impartial. And whilst, the interviews on the BBC, they attack both sides equally when they make mistakes, when they have flaws, if their arguments aren't well-founded. They question both sides. Then it's not a one-sided organisation at all, I would say. But I think, is British politics still only morphing into a version of American? I think it can never get all the way to the system of American politics, but if you look at Boris Johnson, his style over substance approach to PMQs, I think is a lot more American than it had maybe traditionally David Cameron's approach.
I also think the idea that Boris Johnson has a big personality and he's electable because of his personality, in the same way that Trump was electable because of his personality. Yeah. But are we moving away, as Brexit gets further into the past, as Donald Trump will eventually go into the past, depending on this next election? We've, as a society, growing out of this idea of having personable politicians. I don't think we want that anymore. Yeah, I mean,
Keir Starmer. He's not exactly a large personality. He's just a very good politician. He's great.
I think we want boring.
You almost want him to be boring. You just want him to be efficient. You don't want scandal. You don't want pomp. You just want simple, boring politician.
That's what Biden is as well. He's just a politician. That's what you want. You don't want someone really progressive, because then you're shutting out older voters. You just want someone that's just going to do the job for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
And that's what Biden is for the US, I think. He's not someone that's going to rock the boat. He's not someone that's going to nationalise medical. He's not going to do that. But also, I don't think someone that would do that would be electable.
Yeah, I think the thing with I think a lot of people, politics is slowly becoming more and more partisan and more tribal, and everyone's hating the other side. And there needs to be a kind of reunification. You can have differing opinions, but you don't need to attack someone for their opinions. I am for, personally, a state-run kind of public healthcare system. But that doesn't mean that private healthcare systems means that you want people to die and you don't want people to get healthcare.
Yeah.
You just saying there's a different answer to it. And so if you think Medicare for all is a good answer, that's okay, but it doesn't mean that if you don't, that you're then ethically or morally in the black.
Yeah.
I think people need to become more unified. I think that's what Joe Biden can do, as a kind of a relatively conservative Democrat.
Be like the middle ground to what has been a very
turmoil
time in politics for US and Britain.
Yeah, I think it could be on Joe Biden's official campaign website, it's a battle for the soul of the nation. It's like the tagline that's plastered all over it. I think really the US politics has a global impact. It could be a battle for, the soul of politics. Do we want to continue to have this kind of personality cult breed, or do we want to move back to actual debate politics where you can have nuanced conversations about things?
Almost just moving back to boring politics, where where they're just discussing policy and stuff that normal people are like, oh, I'm not interested in that. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But that's not what has been taking place over the past 4 years. It's always been just massive conversation, massive arguments about and
tweets and things that don't really matter. Yeah. Like it's almost entirely forgotten that Donald Trump pulled America, or like completely rewrit the kind of North American Free Trade Agreement and pulled them out of the transatlantic one, pulled them out of the trans-Pacific ones, because policy just almost doesn't matter. It's just about personality at this point.
Yeah.
And I think if we can go back towards the merits of policy, then I think that's a better place for politics to be in. Just perhaps a worse place for Fox News for it to be in.
Yeah, almost like in Britain. What have they been talking about? Oh, like at the prom.
Whether or not to play Rule Britannia at the proms.
What a ridiculous argument. But that's what's making headlines in the papers, rather than the chance that a no-deal Brexit is becoming quite big. But
Brexit draws closer every day, but you're worried about what song they're playing at the proms. I've never even watched the proms. I don't even know when the proms is. I don't know the words to Rule Britannia. But I think there are much better ways to deal with discrimination in this country than getting rid of a song. Whether or not it should go is a personal matter. I don't think there's a right answer. But there are certainly things that are right to do. You can end discrimination and end poverty in much better ways than ending a song. Yeah. That's not going to help anyone feed their family. But that's the stuff that makes the headlines. But that's what makes the headlines in the Daily Mail, because that's what's going to drive people.
That's what's going to get a big audience. That's what rouse people up.
Yeah, I think there are substantial issues which are not getting talked about. As in, we were looking at the policies of Joe Biden and Donald Trump earlier, and climate change was this election was going to be the election for climate change, and I haven't heard anyone mention climate change in any coverage. Whilst Donald Trump doesn't even believe that climate change exists, when the 99% of scientists say it does, and I'm more willing to believe 99% of scientists than the former host of The American Apprentice. And I think Joe Biden's policy, he wants to invest into the US economy over 4 years, $2 trillion into green jobs, and he wants to end fossil fuels by 2035 in the US. Whereas Donald Trump wants to end government regulation so you can burn as much coal as you like. And it's just nonsensical policies that, hark back to the Industrial Revolution is what Donald Trump wants. It's just insane how little it gets talked about as opposed to what Donald Trump's tweeting about and how much that drives polls.
Like I was saying, people don't care about policy. That's not what's taking over the debate. It's more Christian faith and abortion and stuff that's kind of already been sorted out. They're still talking about. I mean,
abortion in America is this huge wedge issue that comes up in almost every single election. Congress, Senate. If someone has an abortion, that will you might even get elected if you've had an abortion, even if you're pro-abortion. And it's just it's such a minute issue. It's an important thing, but you're governing one of the biggest democracies in the world. Abortion is the least of most people's worries.
Yeah.
There are more important things to do, jobs and the economy and, foreign trade and, military foreign policy as opposed to abortion. It's American politics is, well, it's just a continuous cycle of driving wedge issues to try and split the vote so you get exactly 270 seats in the Electoral College.
Well, we are now entering the final stages of the US election, aren't we? There's less than 10 weeks to go, 9 weeks.
9-ish weeks to go.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll be doing quite a few more of these US
We'll get more of these on. We'll have more to discuss. We'll have new policy. This is the kind of time now where policy is announced. People try and really kind of say, paint themselves as I can be the next president. Look at me. And I think it's going to be the most interesting time. And as always, there'll be more surprises. There'll be more twists. There'll be, the Trump Access Hollywood tapes came out just before the election. There's will Donald Trump announce that there's a vaccine for COVID just around the corner, even if, it's months away because, well, he can. No one's going to stop him from doing it. He can say what he likes if it's on Twitter. So I think it's going to be an interesting time.
Yeah, so we'll be getting lots of guests on. And as ever, thank you for listening.